"My daughter is not a trophy," Princess Seraphina said, but the king's herald kept reading the law anyway. That was the first thing Ryan Walker heard when the great crystal doors opened and every noble in the Aurelian palace turned to stare at the human in the gray maintenance uniform. The royal hall was built to make people feel small. Its ceiling rose nearly 200 feet above polished white stone, its walls glowing with soft blue fire trapped inside veins of glass, its balconies crowded with lords, generals, priests, and camera drones streaming the trial to half the known galaxy. At the center of it all stood King Alaric Vale, tall, silver-robed, and carved by age into something more statue than man. Beside him stood his daughter, Princess Seraphina, nearly 7 feet tall, pale blue-silver skin catching the light like moonlit water, her violet eyes fixed straight ahead because princesses, apparently, were not allowed to look tired. The herald's voice rolled across the hall. "By ancient crown law, the victor of the trial of sovereign claim shall earn the right to stand beside the king's daughter and bind his house to the throne." A cheer rose from the alien nobles, sharp and polished and hungry. Ryan stopped just inside the doorway with a tool bag in one hand and a half-empty paper coffee cup in the other. He had been under the palace floor 20 minutes ago, elbow deep in a gravity junction that smelled like hot copper and burned dust. Nobody had told him there would be a crowd. Nobody had told him the crowd would be laughing before he even spoke. The contenders stood in a shining line near the dais. Armored princes, war captains, bloodline champions with ceremonial blades and family banners floating behind them. Then the herald checked the final name on his glowing slate, frowned as if the words themselves had insulted him, and announced, "Ryan Walker, Terran maintenance contractor, temporary palace systems technician." For half a second, the hall went quiet. Then the laughter hit. It rolled down from the balconies, bounced off the crystal ceiling, and poured over Ryan like cold rain. One lord actually covered his mouth with 4 jeweled fingers. Another leaned to his neighbor and said, loud enough for the translation field to carry it, "Is the mammal lost?" Ryan did not smile. He did not bow too low either. Back home in Colorado, his mother had taught him not to make a scene unless the building was on fire. His father had taught him that sometimes the building was on fire and everyone important was too proud to smell smoke. Ryan looked past the nobles, past the king, past the cameras, and up toward the western arch where a tiny red service light blinked behind a decorative panel. It blinked twice, paused, then blinked 3 more times. Wrong rhythm, wrong circuit, wrong room. Princess Seraphina noticed him noticing it. She was the only one who did. King Alaric lifted one silver hand, and the laughter thinned but did not disappear. "Human," he said, his voice deep and patient in the way powerful men sound patient when they have already decided you are beneath them. "This trial is not a repair appointment." Ryan set his coffee carefully on the nearest marble ledge. "No, sir," he said. "Looks more expensive." A few nobles laughed harder. The king's jaw tightened. "You understand what this ceremony means?" Ryan wiped a smear of machine oil from his thumb with a rag. "I understand what the posted rules say." That got a different kind of silence, not complete, but interested. The kind that comes when a joke starts standing upright. Lord Cashendrake, the favorite to win, stepped forward in black gold armor that seemed designed mainly to make everyone else feel underdressed. His translated name sounded American, but nothing about his smile did. Then perhaps the human can read aloud the part where tools are returned to the servant's entrance. More laughter. Ryan looked at him for the first time. Not angry, not scared, just tired, like a man at the DMV hearing someone argue with the clerk. "I'm not here for you." Cashin's smile sharpened. "No, you are here because your species mistakes invitation for equality." Ryan let that sit for a beat. He could feel the old familiar pull in his chest, the part of him that wanted to snap back, to make the room understand he had worn heavier things than their insults. But that never helped. Loud men burned energy. Quiet men saved it. So Ryan turned to the king instead and asked, "Is this legally binding?" The hall erupted again, but Seraphina did not laugh. Her gaze had dropped to the bracelet locked around her wrist, the ceremonial control band pulsing with the same wrong rhythm as the service light above the arch. Ryan saw her see it. For the first time since he had entered the hall, her perfect royal expression cracked just enough to look human. The king leaned forward. "Every word of crown law is binding." Ryan picked up his tool bag. Good, he said. Then I'm entering the trial. The laughter came back louder than before, crueler now, because the galaxy thought it was watching a human humiliate himself for a princess. They had no idea he had come because the floor was humming wrong. 3 hours before the palace laughed at him, Ryan Walker was lying flat on his back under the royal hall with a flashlight between his teeth and a gravity conduit winding 6 inches from his left ear. The floor above him was being polished for the trial, which meant every few minutes some noble walked overhead in boots worth more than Ryan's apartment back in Denver. Dust shook loose from the ceiling panels and landed on his face. Great, he muttered, pulling the flashlight out of his mouth. Space royalty still sheds dirt. His supervisor, an Aurelian clerk named Ven, stood at the open service hatch holding a tablet like it was a shield. Ven had pale green skin, silver facial ridges, and the nervous energy of a guy who knew the building was broken but did not want his name on the work order. Terran Walker, your repair window is closing. The ceremonial procession begins soon. Ryan tightened a bolt, listened, then stopped. The conduit should have settled into a steady hum. Instead, it pulsed twice, paused, then pulsed 3 times. That is not a repair issue, Ryan said. That is a reroute. Ven blinked. Hey, what? Ryan slid out from under the panel, wiped grease off his cheek, and pointed at the maintenance diagram. Somebody moved the load path from the lower stabilizers into the western arch. During a normal event, that is stupid. During a gravity trial, that is a loaded gun with a ribbon tied around it. Ven's face tightened. You should choose your words carefully in a royal residence. I am choosing them carefully. The floor is rigged. The clerk looked toward the hall above them, where music had already started to swell through the stone. Impossible. The palace system is ancient crown technology. Ryan sat up, his knees cracking. Buddy, I worked on Navy landing platforms in the Jovian yards. Everything ancient is just old equipment people got sentimental about. He tapped the diagram again. The bracelet they put on the princess, is it tied into the hall's gravity field? Ven hesitated too long. That was the answer. Ryan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. He had seen that look before on contractors, officers, inspectors, people who knew a bad thing was happening and hoped it would become someone else's problem before the paperwork reached them. Get me to the security chief, Ryan said. Ven lowered his voice. You are a maintenance contractor, and you are standing next to a system that can crush a royal ceremony into a public disaster. Ven flinched at the word disaster. You cannot accuse noble houses without proof. Ryan stared at him. Then let me get proof. 10 minutes later, proof became a locked door, a denied access code, and 2 palace guards telling him the trial floor was restricted to bloodline candidates only. One of them looked down at Ryan's tool bag and said, soft-skinned repair mammals do not belong near crown law. Ryan almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because there it was, the whole galaxy in one sentence. He was useful when pipes burst, invisible when floors shined, and insulting the moment he noticed the wrong people doing the wrong thing. He took a slow breath. His old staff sergeant used to say anger was a flashlight pointed into your own eyes. So Ryan put his anger somewhere useful. He walked to the public law terminal beside the service entrance, searched the trial code, and read every miserable line while nobles passed him like furniture. Buried near the bottom, under a section nobody had updated in 600 years, he found it. Any sworn worker of the royal house who discovers a direct hazard to the crown may enter the trial to preserve the sovereign line. Ryan read it twice. Then he signed his name. The terminal accepted. When the doors opened and the herald called him into the hall, Ryan was not thinking about marriage, glory, or the princess as a prize. He was thinking about that wrong hum under the floor, that bracelet on her wrist, and the fact that everyone powerful enough to stop it was too proud to listen to a man with grease on his hands. The moment Ryan stepped onto the contenders' platform, the royal attendants tried to dress him like a joke. One approached with a ceremonial sash meant for candidates of noble blood, held it up against his gray work shirt, and whispered something that made the nearest guard snicker. Ryan took the sash, folded it once, and handed it back. No thanks, he said. It will get caught on something. Across the preparation chamber, Princess Seraphina watched him through the reflection of a mirrored wall made from black crystal. The other contenders were already performing for her. One prince flexed the living plates of his armor until they shimmered like a car commercial. Another described the number of border moons his family owned. Lord Cashendrake stood closest to her, polished and calm, speaking in that smooth voice men use when they are not asking for something because they believe it is already theirs. Your Highness, Cashen said, when this formality ends, I will restore discipline to the crown. The outer houses respect strength. They do not respect hesitation. Seraphina kept her face still. She had been trained for that since childhood. Smile when the trade envoys mispronounced your name. Stand straight when military advisors discussed your future as if you were a road they planned to build through. Do not flinch when old laws turned your life into a prize with better lighting. And what do you believe I respect, Lord Drake? She asked. Cashen's smile barely moved. Order. It was the kind of answer that sounded respectful until you noticed it did not include her. Ryan, meanwhile, had found the wall panel behind a decorative statue and was pretending not to inspect it. He ran one thumb along the seam, then looked at the floor, then up at the bracelet locked around Seraphina's wrist. She felt the pulse again, faint and cold against her skin. 2 beats. A pause. 3 beats. The same rhythm she had noticed when he entered the hall. Taryn Walker, she said. The chamber quieted faster than it had any right to. Ryan turned, one hand still on the strap of his tool bag. Ma'am, do you intend to insult crown tradition through negligence or through confidence? A few nobles smiled, pleased she had joined the sport. Ryan did not play along. He looked at her for a long second, not at her gown, not at the crown marks painted along her collarbone, not at the cameras waiting for romance or humiliation. He looked at her wrist. Then he looked back at her eyes. Neither. Cashen gave a soft laugh. Careful, human. You are addressing the king's daughter. I know who I am addressing. Ryan's voice stayed low, almost conversational. That is the problem. Seraphina felt something shift in the room. Not fear. Not yet. Curiosity, maybe. The dangerous kind. She stepped closer, ignoring the sharp inhale from her attendants. Up close, the human looked even less like a champion. He had tired eyes, a small scar near his chin, and grease under one fingernail that the palace soaps had failed to remove. But there was no hunger in him. No awe. No calculation about what she could give him. That unsettled her more than Cashen's ambition. Everyone else came here to win, she said quietly. Why did you? Ryan glanced toward the nearest camera drone. Then he shifted half a step, placing his shoulder between the drone and his mouth. It was such a small movement that most people missed it. Seraphina did not. Because somebody tied the gravity grid to your bracelet, he said. Her breath caught before she could stop it. Cashen's eyes narrowed, but he was too far away to hear the words. That is not possible, she whispered. I wish that helped, Ryan said. It usually does not. The bracelet pulsed again. Her skin prickled beneath it. For the first time in years, Seraphina wanted to tear off a piece of royal jewelry in front of the entire court and throw it across the room. Instead, she did what she had been trained to do. She stood still. Are you accusing someone? Ryan shook his head. Not yet. Accusations are easy. Proof is harder. And you have proof? I have a bad circuit, a locked security door, and an old law that got me within 50 feet of you. He paused, then added, that is enough for now. She studied him, searching for the angle, the hidden demand, the moment when the human would finally ask for favor. It never came. Behind them, Cashen raised his voice for the watching nobles. Perhaps the Terran is overwhelmed by royal attention. Ryan did not look back. Seraphina did. For once, she let the court see the cold edge under her perfect manners. Cashen stopped smiling. Then the horn sounded, calling the contenders to the first trial. Ryan picked up his tool bag like a man heading into a long shift, not a ceremony. As he passed Seraphina, he spoke just softly enough for only her to hear. When it starts, do not trust the floor. The first trial was called the Walk of Gravity, and the palace treated it like a sacred test instead of what Ryan saw immediately, which was a 300-foot hallway with too much money spent on lighting and not enough on safety rails. The contenders lined up at the entrance while the crowd watched from behind a transparent energy barrier. The floor ahead was made of dark mirrored stone, divided into 20 glowing sections. Each section increased the pull of gravity a little more until the final stretch, where most species needed powered armor just to stay upright. The herald raised both arms and announced, only those worthy of the crown may cross without kneeling. Ryan looked at the floor, then at the control vents along the side walls. That is a pretty dramatic way to describe a stress test. he said. One of the armored princes beside him snorted. Still time to withdraw, little technician. Ryan rolled his shoulders. His work boots squeaked faintly against the polished stone. I have had worse Mondays. Up on the royal balcony, Serafina stood beside her father with her hands folded, but her fingers pressed against the bracelet hard enough to pale the skin beneath it. She remembered Ryan's warning. Do not trust the floor. Lord Cashin stood 2 places ahead of Ryan, calm as church bells, his black gold armor adjusting to the field before the trial even began. That caught Ryan's attention. The first gravity section was not active yet, but Cashin's armor had already compensated. Either his equipment was reading tomorrow's weather, or somebody had given him the storm report early. The horn sounded. The first contenders charged forward to applause. They moved like athletes in a championship entrance, fast, proud, built for cameras. Ryan did not move. He watched the timing lights. 2 beats. Pause. 3 beats. There it was again. The same rhythm from the bracelet, the same bad pulse from under the palace. A royal guard near the gate leaned toward him. Are you frozen, human? Ryan stepped onto the first section. No. Listening. The first pull hit his knees like a heavy backpack. Nothing terrible, just enough to make his joints complain. He took 1 slow step, then another, placing his boots near the seams instead of the center plates. The crowd laughed again, but it sounded thinner now because Ryan was not stumbling. He was counting. Ahead of him, a broad-shouldered war captain tried to impress the room by sprinting into the 4th section. His armor locked up, not dangerously, but enough to drop him awkwardly onto 1 knee. The crowd gasped. The captain cursed his equipment while attendants rushed to guide him out of the field. Ryan kept walking. The 5th section pressed on his lungs. The 6th made his tool bag feel like it was filled with bricks. He set it down, opened it, and pulled out a small magnetic clamp. Cashin looked back and smiled. Improvising already? Maintaining, Ryan said. He clipped the clamp onto a floor seam and used it like a temporary handhold as the gravity rose. It was not elegant. It was not royal. It looked like a tired man fixing a garage door in front of a billion viewers. But it worked. Serafina watched the other candidates fight the trial like it was an enemy. Ryan treated it like machinery. He paused where others pushed, shifted where others braced, breathed when the field surged. In his head, he was back under Navy platforms near Jupiter, 23 years old, hands shaking from cold, learning that panic wasted oxygen faster than fear ever could. A prince in silver armor laughed and said, "The human crawls." Ryan planted 1 palm on the floor, waited for the pulse to pass, then stood again. "The human is still here," he said. By the final 40 feet, the hall had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by the low murmur of people realizing the wrong kind of man was still moving forward. Cashin crossed first to thunderous applause. Another noble cross second. Ryan reached the final plate third, breathing hard, sweat running down his temple, 1 hand wrapped around his clamp. He did not raise his arms. He did not look at the cameras. He looked up at the western arch, where the red service light had stopped blinking completely. That was worse. Serafina saw his face change by less than an inch, but somehow it frightened her more than if he had shouted. The herald announced Ryan's name with visible discomfort. The galaxy did not cheer. It watched. Ryan bent down, picked up his tool bag, and whispered to himself, "Now we have a problem." The break between trials was supposed to last 20 minutes, which in palace language meant nobles were given chilled drinks, musicians played soft string music, and servants moved through the hall pretending nobody had just watched half the royal candidates embarrass themselves on a glowing floor. Ryan spent his break sitting on a service crate behind a curtain near the west corridor, 1 boot planted against his tool bag, his right hand wrapped in a clean strip of white repair cloth. The gravity field had pulled something in his wrist the wrong way. Not broken, probably. Painful enough to make him annoyed. He flexed his fingers and breathed through it while the crowd outside argued over what they had seen. Some said the human got lucky. Some said the trial had gone easy on him. Some said Crown law should never have allowed a contractor to stand beside royal blood. Ryan listened without reacting. Back home, people talked the same way when a working guy walked into a room full of executives and knew the machine better than they did. Different planet, same noise. A shadow fell across the curtain. "You are difficult to humiliate," Lord Cashindrake said. Ryan did not look up right away. He finished tightening the wrap around his wrist with his teeth, then rested his hand on his knee. You need something? Cashin stepped into the service alcove alone, his black gold armor humming softly, polished enough to reflect the blue palace lights. Up close, he looked less like a warrior and more like a man who had never carried his own luggage. I admire persistence, Cashin said. In small creatures, it can almost resemble courage. Ryan nodded once, as if considering that. That line work on other people? Cashin's smile stayed in place, but the warmth left it. I am offering you a way out. Withdraw before the second trial. You will receive a private transport, 200,000 crown marks, and a formal statement saying your participation was honorable. Ryan glanced toward the hall, where Princess Seraphina stood surrounded by attendants and watched the room like someone trapped behind glass. That is a lot of money for a guy you are not worried about. I am worried about appearances, Cashin said. The galaxy enjoys novelty. A human surviving one trial is amusing. A human interfering further becomes disruptive. Ryan leaned back against the wall. His shoulders hurt. His head was starting to ache behind the eyes. For one honest second, 200,000 crown marks sounded nice. He thought about his little apartment in Denver, the rent that kept climbing, the old truck his brother kept telling him to sell, the message from his mother still sitting unanswered because he had been too tired after shift. He had not woken up that morning wanting to be brave. Most people never did. Real life did not hand you a soundtrack and a clean reason. It handed you a bad circuit, a locked door, and somebody important pretending not to hear the alarm. Cashin stepped closer. Take the gift, Terran. Go home. This is not your kingdom. Ryan looked at his wrapped hand, then at the red service light above the corridor. Still dead. That is the problem, he said. Cashin narrowed his eyes. Explain. If it was my kingdom, somebody would have shut this down already. For the first time, Cashin's mask slipped. Not much. Just enough. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled once against his side. Ryan saw it and felt the shape of the room change. There it was. Not proof, but pressure. Cashin was not simply arrogant. He was nervous. You mistake patience for permission, Cashin said softly. Ryan stood, slowly, because his back did not appreciate sudden movements after the walk. He picked up his tool bag and settled the strap over his shoulder. And you mistake quiet for stupid. The air between them went still. Outside, the horn began to sound, calling the contenders back. Cashin's smile returned, thinner now. The second trial will not reward maintenance tricks. Ryan stepped past him toward the curtain. Good, he said. I am running out of tricks. Cashin gave a quiet laugh behind him. Then you are running out of time. Ryan paused with one hand on the curtain, thinking of an old training yard in Virginia, rain soaking through his uniform, a staff sergeant telling him that fear was not a stop sign, it was a dashboard light. You noticed it, you respected it, and you kept the vehicle on the road. He looked back at Cashin. You done? Cashin did not answer. Ryan walked out into the royal hall, where the galaxy was waiting to laugh again, and where Princess Seraphina's bracelet had just begun to pulse faster. The second trial began with the kind of ceremony that made Ryan trust it even less. The palace lights dimmed, the music dropped into a low royal hum, and the floor opened to reveal 6 ancient crown sentinels rising from below like museum pieces that had been told they were still important. They were tall machines, bright silver, smooth as sculpture, each carrying a ceremonial staff tipped with a dull blue glow. The herald lifted his chin and announced, "The crown dual measures restraint, judgment, and noble command. The sentinels are bound by law to test, never harm." Ryan stood at the edge of the arena, rolling his sore wrist once. "That is a funny thing to say out loud," he murmured. The prince beside him glanced over. "Afraid of training machines?" "No," Ryan said. "Afraid of people who keep promising machines are safe." Up on the balcony, Seraphina's bracelet pulsed again, faster now, almost warm against her skin. She kept her hand folded beneath her sleeve, but Ryan saw the stiffness in her arm. Cashin stood across the arena, relaxed, waiting for applause to find him. The horn sounded. The sentinels moved. For the first minute, the trial looked exactly like the crowd expected. Noble candidates stepped forward, blocked glowing staffs with shield gauntlets, bowed to the king, and earned polite cheers. Ryan stayed near the back, watching the machines instead of fighting them. Their footwork was too clean. Their heads turned a half-second before each contender moved, not reading motion, but receiving direction. Then the lead sentinel paused, its smooth face tilted toward the balcony. Ryan's stomach dropped. "No," he said quietly. The machine raised its staff, not toward any contender, but toward Princess Seraphina. The blue tip brightened. Nobody reacted at first because the court believed in its own ceremony more than its own eyes. The royal guards hesitated, waiting for the system to tell them whether tradition allowed panic. Ryan did not wait. He grabbed the small magnetic clamp from his belt and threw it hard. It struck the sentinel's wrist joint with a sharp crack of metal on metal, knocking the staff just low enough that the burst of light passed over the balcony and shattered harmlessly against the upper shield. The hall went silent for one stunned breath. Then everyone started shouting at once. Seraphina stepped back, eyes wide but still standing. King Alaric rose from his throne. "Stop the trial." The herald looked down at his slate, confused and pale. "Your Majesty, the system still reads ceremonial compliance." Cashin's voice cut through the chaos. "The human has interfered with a sacred test." Ryan was already moving. "Your sacred test just aimed at your daughter." The sentinels turned together, no longer pretending to follow the contenders. Their heads tracked Seraphina's bracelet. Ryan sprinted across the arena, lungs tight from the gravity trial, boots slipping on polished stone. He reached the balcony stairs as two guards finally stepped in front of the princess, more ceremonial than useful, their faces full of uncertainty. "Move," Ryan said. One guard stiffened. "You cannot command royal security." Seraphina looked at the guard, then at Ryan, and for the first time her voice broke through the room like a bell. "Let him through." Ryan reached her just as the bracelet flashed white. He did not grab her like a hero in a story. He caught her by the forearm, firm but careful, and pulled her away from the railing. A second pulse burst from the sentinel below, hitting the place where she had been standing and leaving the stone smoking faintly but intact. No screams, no blood, just the sound of every noble in the palace understanding, too late, that the human had been right. Ryan guided Seraphina behind a support column and dropped to one knee beside the bracelet. "Can you take it off?" She tried. The band tightened. Her face stayed calm, but her voice lowered. "No," Ryan pulled a thin tool from his bag. "Then we do this the ugly way." Cashin shouted from the arena floor. "He is abducting her." The cameras turned. The guards turned. The whole galaxy turned. Ryan looked at Seraphina. "Do you trust me?" She stared at the bracelet, then at the machines below, then at the court that had laughed while danger stood in plain sight. "No," she said, "but I trust them less." Ryan almost smiled. "Fair enough." He cut the decorative clasp from her sleeve, wrapped his hand around the bracelet to block its signal as much as he could, and pulled her toward the service stairs beneath the balcony. Behind them, Cashin's voice rose, polished and furious. "Seize the human." Ryan did not look back. "Your Highness," he said, pushing open a maintenance door, "now would be a great time to ignore every royal rule you were raised with." Seraphina lifted her torn sleeve, stepped into the narrow service passage, and answered, "I have been waiting my whole life for that." The service passage behind the balcony was not built for royal exits. It was narrow, dim, and smelled like warm dust, old wiring, and the kind of cleaning solution nobody used in public rooms. Ryan moved first with one hand on the wall and the other wrapped around Seraphina's bracelet, trying to muffle the signal while his palm prickled from the heat coming off it. Behind them, the palace shook with thousands of voices, guards shouting over one another, nobles demanding explanations, camera drones buzzing like angry insects outside the sealed door. Seraphina followed without complaint, but Ryan could hear her breathing too carefully. That was how people sounded when they were trying not to panic because they had spent their entire life being watched. "You can breathe normally," he said. "There are no cameras in here." "I am not sure I remember how," she answered. Ryan glanced back. For a second, she was not a princess, not a symbol, not the center of some ancient law. She was just a young woman in a torn ceremonial sleeve, carrying the weight of a kingdom that had never asked whether she wanted it. He reached into his tool bag, pulled out a folded pressure wrap, and handed it to her. "Hold this against your wrist." Hard. She took it, eyes narrowing. "Is this medical advice?" "No. Maintenance advice." "Same idea, less paperwork." A faint sound escaped her, almost a laugh, but it disappeared when voices echoed from the corridor behind them. "This way," Ryan said. He opened a floor hatch and climbed down into the maintenance level beneath the royal hall. The space below was a world the nobles had never seen. Low ceilings, exposed pipes, warning labels, service ladders, and humming gravity lines running like veins under all that polished stone. Up above, the palace believed in crowns. Down here, it ran on bolts. Serafina stepped onto the metal walkway and looked around with quiet disbelief. This has been under the throne room my entire life. Most important rooms have an ugly basement, Ryan said. People just forget to thank it. They moved along the walkway as the trial broadcast continued on the emergency speakers overhead. Cashin's voice filled the maintenance level, smooth and wounded and perfectly rehearsed. The human has removed the princess from royal protection. Until she is recovered, I ask the king to grant me emergency command under crown security law. Serafina stopped walking. He is using my disappearance to take control. Ryan crouched beside a junction box and opened the panel. That was probably the plan after the sentinels missed. Missed, she repeated softly, as if the word had teeth. Ryan looked up at her. Sorry, bad habit. I make things smaller so I can keep working. For once, Serafina did not have a royal answer ready. Above them, the crowd that had laughed at Ryan was now watching every camera angle, every replay, every freeze frame of the sentinel turning toward the balcony before the human moved. Across the galaxy, living rooms, military posts, trade stations, and orbital diners fell into the same uneasy quiet. The joke had started walking around with a tool bag and pulling the truth out of the walls. Ryan connected his handheld scanner to the junction box. Lines of Aurelian code scrolled across the screen, too pretty and too locked down. I need the central gravity core, he said. Where is it? Serafina pointed down the walkway. Beneath the old coronation chamber. But that level is sealed to everyone except royal engineers. Ryan gave her a look. She lifted her bound wrist. I am royal. Good, he said, standing. I am an engineer. The bracelet pulsed hard enough to make the lights flicker. Far behind them, a security door opened with a heavy metallic groan. Cashin's guards had entered the lower level. Serafina straightened, training pulling her posture back into place. Ryan saw it and shook his head. Do not turn into a statue on me now. What should I turn into? She asked. Ryan started down the walkway, faster now. A person who wants to live. For the first time that day, Princess Serafina did not ask what crown law required. She ran. The central gravity core sat beneath the old coronation chamber inside a round room the size of a small church, and it looked nothing like Ryan expected. He had imagined exposed machinery, cooling towers, maybe a few honest warning labels. Instead, the Aurelian engineers had built a cathedral around a machine. Silver arches curved over a floating sphere of blue-white light. Polished steps led down to control stations shaped like altar stones. Everything glowed, hummed, and acted important. Ryan stopped at the entrance, breathing hard from the run, one hand still guarding Serafina's bracelet. Of course, he said. Your basement has a throne for the air conditioner. Serafina leaned against the doorway, trying to catch her breath without looking like she needed to. This core controls every gravity field in the palace. No, Ryan said, already walking to the nearest console. It is supposed to. Right now somebody else is steering through your bracelet. He plugged his handheld scanner into the console. The screen flashed red and rejected him in 3 languages, 2 of which sounded offended. Ryan sighed. That tracks. Serafina stepped beside him and placed her wrapped wrist near the scanner. The system recognized royal bloodline access. The lock display opened at once. Ryan glanced at her. That is convenient. Do not get used to it, she said. The code unfolded across the screen in elegant symbols, 2 layered for a quick repair, but Ryan did not need elegant. He needed the part where the machine lied. He followed the pulse through the grid, from the bracelet to the sentinels, from the sentinels to the Western Arch, from the Western Arch to a hidden command string buried beneath the trial protocols. There it was. A second authority signature. Lord Cashin Drake. Ryan let out a slow breath. Got you. Serafina looked at the screen, and whatever color remained in her face seemed to drain into the blue light. He signed it with his own house seal. People like him always do, Ryan said. They call it destiny until it turns into evidence. Heavy footsteps sounded from the corridor outside. Cashin's guards were close now, moving carefully, confident in their armor and numbers. Serafina straightened. Can you stop the signal? Ryan studied the console. Cleanly? No. Uncleanly. He looked around the room and found what he had been hoping for. A maintenance panel at floor level, locked with a simple mechanical latch because even alien royalty needed someone to fix things when the pretty interface failed. Ryan dropped to one knee and opened his tool bag. Uncleanly is where humans have a long and proud tradition. He removed the panel, reached into the crawl space, and began pulling manual breakers one by one. The core shuddered. Lights dimmed. The beautiful control room lost its perfect hum and started sounding like a machine again. Serafina watched him work, his face tight with pain, his wrapped hand shaking each time the bracelet pulsed against his palm. Are you afraid? She asked. Ryan did not look up. Yes, ma'am. That answer surprised her more than any brave speech could have. You admit that? I am from Earth. We are afraid of storms, bills, bad test results, strange noises in the garage, and people who say they are only following procedure. He pulled another breaker. The floor tilted gently beneath them. Being afraid is normal. Quitting is optional. The doors behind them opened. Cashin entered with 6 armored guards, his perfect smile gone now, replaced by something colder and smaller. Step away from the core, human. Ryan kept one hand inside the panel. I would love to, but your wiring is a crime scene. Cashin raised his chin. You are surrounded. Ryan looked at the gravity map on his scanner, then at the polished armor around the doorway, all of it built to resist force from the outside and none of it designed for sudden weight from within. He pressed the final manual switch. The room made a deep, harmless, bone-low sound, and the guards froze as their own armor became too heavy to move. One by one, they sank to their knees, pinned by weight but breathing, confused, and very much alive. Cashin staggered but stayed upright by gripping the doorframe. Ryan stood slowly, blood warm under his nose from the pressure shift, eyes steady. No, he said. You are stabilized. Serafina stared at the men who had come to seize her and then at the human who had stopped them with a service panel and a bad wrist. Above them, the emergency broadcast flickered back on across the palace. Ryan plugged his scanner into the open core and sent the hidden command string to every screen in the royal hall. Your Highness, he said quietly, I think it is time your father saw the receipt. For 3 seconds after Ryan sent the files to the royal hall, nobody moved. The proof appeared on every screen at once, clean and cold and impossible to talk around. Cashin's house seal on the hidden command string, payment records to palace engineers, altered trial protocols, emergency authority prepared before the ceremony even began. Up in the great hall, the nobles who had laughed at the humans stared at the evidence with their mouths half open. The camera drone stopped drifting and hung in place like even the machines knew the room had changed. King Alaric stood alone on the dais, one hand gripping the arm of his throne, his silver robes suddenly looking too heavy for him. His voice came through the speakers in the gravity core, lower than before. Lord Drake, he said, is this true? Cashin, still braced against the doorway below, looked up at the nearest screen. For a moment, he tried to wear the face of a wronged noble. Then he saw Serafina standing beside Ryan, alive, steady, and no longer hidden behind anyone's law. His expression hardened. I did what your hesitation would not, he said. The crown needed strength. Serafina stepped forward. Her sleeve was torn, her wrist wrapped in white maintenance cloth, and her ceremonial bracelet lay open on the console beside her, finally silent. No, she said. You needed ownership and called it strength. The words traveled through the broadcast into the hall, across the palace, and out into the galaxy. No cheer followed. No dramatic roar. Just silence. The kind that makes people hear themselves clearly for the first time. Ryan stood a step behind her, not because he was afraid, but because it was her life, her father, her kingdom, and he understood something most of that room had forgotten. Saving someone did not give you the right to stand in front of them forever. King Alaric looked at his daughter on the screen, then at Ryan. The old king seemed smaller now, not weak, just human in the way all proud people become human when the bill for their pride finally arrives. Terran Walker, he said, under ancient crown law, you completed the trial while preserving the sovereign line. You have earned the right to claim my daughter's hand and stand beside the throne. The hall held its breath. Around the galaxy, people leaned closer to their screens. They had been told all day that the human was a joke, then a threat, then a thief. Now the law that had mocked him was offering him the one thing every noble had wanted. Ryan looked at Serafina. She looked back, calm but tired, waiting to see whether he was different or just another man reaching for a prettier chain. Ryan rubbed his sore wrist, glanced down at the grease still under one fingernail, and gave a small, weary breath. "Your Majesty," he said, "with respect, I do not own your daughter. I saved her." The words landed harder than any victory speech could have. Serafina closed her eyes for 1 second, not in weakness, but in relief. King Alaric's face changed. Not quickly. Pride does not leave a person quickly. It leaves like a winter thaw, slow and uncomfortable, revealing everything buried underneath. "Then what do you claim?" the king asked. Ryan looked around the gravity core, at the pinned guards, the broken bracelet, the sacred machine exposed behind an ugly service panel. "A written apology to your daughter. A public investigation. Better safety locks on this core. And overtime pay." For the first time all day, Serafina laughed. Not a royal laugh. A real one, surprised and bright, and gone almost as soon as it came. The sound seemed to break something open in the hall above. One by one, the royal guards lowered their weapons. Nobles who had spent their lives bowing to power looked away from Cassian and toward the princess they had treated like a prize. King Alaric bowed his head, not to Ryan, not to the cameras, but to his daughter. "Serafina," he said, and his voice shook with the cost of saying it. "I am sorry." She stood very still. "Then do better." He nodded. "I will." Cassian was taken into custody without ceremony, which somehow suited him worse than defeat. The gravity fields returned to normal. The hall doors opened. And when Ryan and Serafina came back through the service entrance, the same nobles who had laughed at his uniform stepped aside without a word. Ryan did not smile at them. He did not gloat. He just picked up the coffee he had left on the marble ledge hours earlier, found it cold, and drank it anyway. Serafina watched him with quiet wonder. "Is it always like this with humans?" she asked. Ryan looked at the great hall, at the king trying to become a father again, at a galaxy learning that dignity was not something you could win from another person. "No," he said. "Most days we just fix what is broken and hope somebody notices before it falls." Years later, people would argue about the trial, about the law, about the scandal that nearly shattered the Aurelian throne. But the part they shared with their children was simpler. A room full of powerful people laughed at a man with grease on his hands, and he still chose to protect the one person they had forgotten to ask. That was why the galaxy fell silent. Not because a human won, because for one clear moment, everyone understood what strength was supposed to be for.